Hello, this is Professor Lori Benoit with Education 400, and today we're going to continue our study of effective instructional practices by focusing on leading group discussions. So modules 8 and 9 are going to cover leading group discussions. These are extremely valuable to promote engagement in your class and to also allow students to scaffold their learning and for you to provide that scaffolding for them so that they can achieve those higher levels of Webb's depth of knowledge. So let's jump in. Today, our objectives are to describe a range of communication strategies and facilitate techniques to lead group discussions, capturing students' interest and nurturing their voices. So Module 8, we're going to begin talking about class discussions in general, and we're going to focus on one particular type. We're going to do like a little case study. And for your observation hours, I've given you several different kinds for you to preview and sort of get a taste of before we study them in more detail in Module 9. Another objective is going to be to describe how group discussions allow students to practice listening, speaking, and interpreting skills. And another objective is to practice developing and delivering instruction that includes group discussion. Our essential questions for these modules are: how can class discussion be used to promote democratic structures of learning? And what action should I take when establishing a safe and supportive learning environment for students to practice class discussion? So these two questions at the bottom are sort of that big picture meaning. And many times we don't think about necessarily how particular instructional strategies promote democratic learning. And essentially what we're saying is that they promote equitable learning practices. So we're going to really dig deep on that part of it at the beginning. So what exactly is leading group discussions? In a group discussion, the teacher and all of the students work on specific content together, using one another's ideas as resources. The purposes of a discussion are to build collective knowledge and capability in relation to specific instructional goals and to allow students to practice listening, speaking, and interpreting, agreeing and disagreeing. The teacher and a wide range of students contribute orally, listen actively, and respond to and learn from others' contributions. Teachers work to ensure students are positioned as competent among their peers, that patterns of interaction are respectful, and that the collective work of the group uses the strengths of and benefits each student. Essentially, what we're doing with a group discussion is we're providing a space to have a true learning community. And in a learning community, all of our neighbors and their viewpoints, whether we agree or disagree, are considered valuable because they help us understand our own better. They help us understand different perspectives, and essentially they help us understand different lenses and frames of reference. Leading group discussions, and we're going to see this when we get a little bit more to the next slide, it provides a microcosm of what we should expect for civil discourse in larger society, something that we can all agree is needed, and our students need strong models for what this looks like. So how does leading group discussions actually advance justice? The free and fair exchange of ideas is foundational for democracy. This requires the ability to share, justify, and defend one's ideas, and to listen attentively and thoughtfully to the ideas and perspectives of people different from oneself. In classrooms, students practice the skills of reasoned argument, debate, and collective knowledge building toward common goals. Group discussions provide opportunities for students to make sense of complex ideas together and support one another to speak and listen in ways that advance the classroom community and common good. So group discussions are not simply a way to learn the content, although they are very important. They are a way that we can help our students tap into their own critical thinking, and they are a way that we can provide them with an opportunity to extend that, not only their own voice, but to solicit the voice of their peers. And this is why it's considered democratic. So in a true democracy, we've got the free and fair exchange of ideas. And if we think about what democratic actually means, and if you wanted to make the analogy to voting, you know, our vote is our voice, we often say in our Democratic Republic of the United States. So in this case, our voice would be our contribution to that learning community. And it would also be a way that we are individually showing up and representing our particular experience. So let's continue this discussion of equity. We want to be very mindful that group discussions also have the potential to reproduce patterns of inequity in classrooms. So teachers work to identify and disrupt these patterns in all areas of the discussion, from selecting a task that will make space for a wide range of student strengths to concluding in a way that positions students as capable. So let me just deviate a little bit from the narrative here to explain what this means. You've probably been in a class, or maybe you have been observing a class in which the intended point of a class discussion was to engage all voices in the class discussion. But perhaps there was one highly vocal member of the learning community, and maybe there was perhaps one that was very silent, very quiet, or all the way silent. And in that case, that would have not been an equitable discussion. So our job as teachers is to create a framework so that all students have the opportunity to be heard. And to do that, we develop criteria. We give them very specific tasks that they're supposed to be doing in the discussion. We help them develop their ideas through sentence stems or question stems. We give them meaningful text so that they have something interesting to discuss, or perhaps a meaningful problem if we're talking about science or math. And so it's up to us to design the discussion in such a way that it is equitable. That is a critical piece, and it's the way that you can ensure that it's going to be effective for all learners. If it's not done well, it can become a free-for-all in the classroom, and that's where you have the one or two dominant who lead the discussion, and everyone else, essentially, they become spectators and they just listen to the other people speak. That's not a democracy. That's not democratic, and it's certainly not the way that we want to facilitate discussion in our classrooms. So let's take just a moment and review this chart. It's so meaningful and it's so rich. I put it all together so that you could kind of see the flow from left to right. Essentially, this is the process of leading a discussion. And it's going to start with what we call discussion enabling. And this is when we have to carefully prepare the discussion. And as you move across the top, you're going to see this is when we actually lead. The way we frame it, the way we orchestrate it, and then the way we record and represent key content. So I recommend that you pause this screen and take just a moment to read through some of these bullet points so that you can see the progression of how we prepare a discussion all the way through to the way we conduct it, and making sure that all students have a chance to participate. So take a moment and pause this screen and review it. Now, this slide kind of boils down those concepts for us. And we see that we still have our two main categories, discussion enabling and discussion leading, but this sums up the ideas for us. In discussion enabling, this means that we select a task, we anticipate student thinking, we set up the task, and we monitor student work. When we're leading the discussion, this means the way that we frame it. So the way that we launch the discussion. What sort of context do we build for it? Then how do we orchestrate it? How do we elicit students' thinking? How do we orient our speakers? So for example, do we give our students roles within the discussion? Do we give them lenses? How do we probe them to speak? So do we have sentence stems that they use, or perhaps we've given them question stems that they prepare in advance, or maybe we have some moderators. How do we make contributions that keep the discussion going? And how do we model that so that our students learn those behaviors and those essentially those patterns of thought? And then at the end, how do we reframe it? So how do we conclude it and help them reflect on their learning and sum up their learning? This can be done in a variety of ways. And this is, exit tickets are very useful for this activity. So then at the bottom, we see that these are built on a foundation. So in the discussion leading, how are we recording and representing this content? So how do students know which questions to ask? How do they know how to transition to a new idea in the discussion in a way that's respectful of peers? How do they know how to respectfully agree and disagree? And those are things that we have to build in. And then how do they monitor their progress? So have we given them criteria? Is there a rubric? And then lastly, these bottom two foundational, maintaining a focus on the instructional point. So that's very important to establish what the outcomes are and what the goals are for the discussion, and make sure that we are consistently helping our students stay on task for the discussion. And then the bottom one says, seeing and disrupting patterns that reproduce inequity. And so this, of course, is something that we as teachers, not only do we do this and that we make sure that all voices are heard, but we create a system, whether that be a rubric or some sort of conversation tracker that students build in to monitor how many times they've spoken. Perhaps we teach them to solicit ideas from their peers or to question their peers on things that we think that they may have specific opinions about. So there are ways that we teach students to do this themselves, and then there are ways that we have to model this for them. For today's model, we're going to start with one discussion technique. It's a really famous one, and it's called Jigsaw. And this is our case study that we're going to do for this particular model. Next module, Module 9, we will actually explore a lot of other discussion techniques. But for this one, we're just going to dig deep into this one case study. So let's review what Jigsaw is. As I read the description on the left, you can study the graphic on the right. In Jigsaw, each student is a member of two groups. One group is called the home group, and then the other group is called the expert group. Each student in a home group is assigned a different topic from a reading. So, for example, no two students in the same home group are going to have the same topic. Students then leave their home group and they explore their assigned topic with the other students assigned to the same topic, considered the expert group. In this expert group, they are going to dig really deeply into whatever their assigned topic is. So for example, let's just say that you had a piece of text, an article, so to speak, and you chopped it into 4 parts. Well, each home group would have, so the colors are representative here of 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so each one of these people would have a different chunk of that text, chunk number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4. They would need to sit silently in their home groups and they would need to read that text. Then they don't discuss with their home group at first. They go to those expert groups. And that's where in those expert groups, they refine their understanding. So everyone in expert group 1 had all of the same chunk of text to read. Everyone in expert group 2 had chunk 2 to read, and so on. And they really make sure that they understand the concepts, that they maybe even formulate some ideas, some questions that they might have about the content. So once they feel really good, and this would all be done with a timer, once they feel good about their chunk and they've become experts, then they go back to their home groups and they share what they've learned with that home group. So essentially the expert is going back, and that's where they put the pieces of the puzzle together. So for example, if this were one text that had been chopped into 4 parts, each part that goes back to the home group is now an expert in that one chunk, and they share their expertise with their home group. So all of the students then benefit from the expertise of their group mates that they developed while they were away from home. There's a video that's part of the Moodle that actually explains this really well, and there's also a sample provided of it being done in a classroom. Additionally, I've given you an article to read about the history of it, how it was developed, and believe it or not, it's a very interesting history and one that underscores why it is considered a form of democratic practice in the classroom. So I want you to study this one discussion technique using the resources that I've given you on Moodle. And as you are reading the videos and preparing as you are reading and watching, as you are watching the videos and reading the article that I've given you, I want you to think about preparing your discussion board. These are going to be your 2 questions for the discussion board. How does the history of Jigsaw support the idea that class discussions are a tool for equity? And number 2, how could you use Jigsaw in your content area? Consider the concepts and texts that may be supported by the Jigsaw method. And feel free, if you like, to Google how is Jigsaw used in math? How is Jigsaw used in science? You can even say like algebra, specific content. If you do that, please make sure that you cite those sources, make sure you link them, because other students may benefit from that resource. So I want you to study Jigsaw. That's kind of your case study. We're going to look at it first really closely, and then when we return in Module 9, we're going to extend our learning to other class discussion techniques. And we're going to examine their effectiveness in your specific content area. So this presentation was compiled by Dr. Williams and Miss Lori Benoit. And if you have any questions, please contact Lori Benoit, lbenoit11@mcneese.edu, and I'll be happy to take your questions regarding this module. I'll see you guys for Module 9. Let me know if you have any questions or need any help.